Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming to ShowMeCon. So Andrew's going to be our last presenter this evening. Andrew Metzger began his career at a service desk and worked his way through system administration to become an InfoSec analyst. He has spent the last 17 years working on government networks in varying capacities. Please give a warm welcome for Andrew Metzger.
See if I can't get this thing hooked up right. Everybody got me back there? No problems? We've had a lot of conversations today, so hopefully my voice doesn't give out on me here. Anyway, Homebrew PowerShell. Some contact info for you. There I am. Top of Monarch Pass, Colorado. Live in a really beautiful state with a lot of things to do. Love the outdoors. Love the activities it provides me. A lot of guys like to get out there, do a lot of hiking. We have a lot of clubs, and they like to tackle the tallest peaks in Colorado. You get these guys that want to climb everything that's over 14,000 feet, and you won't find me tackling one of them unless there's fish at the top. And as beautiful as Colorado is, what most people don't realize is that half the state is like flat. So I live on the Eastern Plains, out on the ranch land. Love it out there. Nobody's around. Nobody to mess with me or stop me from doing what I do. I tend to have a little more ambition than a lot of people. So my hobbies are usually limited by my time and space. Do a little fishing, custom rod building, little gearhead work, and I love to homebrew beer as well as the PowerShell script stuff. Like you said, I've been working for the government for a number of years. I started out as a blue shooter, worked at Peterson Air Force Base, and decided not to leave. So I got out after 6 years, became a contractor, worked in different capacities, starting with the help desk, worked my way up into the sysadmin realm, and eventually into security. It was kind of one of these deals where I've always had the security bug, like how does this work? How can I make it work? How can I make it work better? How can I break it? So when I got my opportunity to go into security, I jumped on it. At the time, the guy I was working for, Jason, was like a super, super bright guy. Like, he had all the answers. Really, really kind of a geek in his own right. So I kind of latched onto him and just started sucking information out of him. One of the things that kind of makes me tick in everything that I do is I tend to say that I'm lazy, but this fits perfectly. Like, why do I want to do a task over and over and over and over and over again when I can do it better, more consistent, keep on track better? So there's my microwave. In the same light that you could press 130 to get a minute and a half, press 90 to get the same thing. In a lot of ways, this is how how the brain works, or how this brain works. It's also a way that in a lot of ways every one of you works. How many of you speak in acronyms these days? Like, who wants to say, System Center Configuration Manager when you could just say SCCM? Or I've even heard guys call it SICM to shorten it even more. So around the time that the government decided to go with Windows Vista, there came a time when the security became an issue of, we'll call it wasn't convenient anymore. Like, if you were a sysadmin and you had to do file system work, in Windows Vista it became a security feature that you couldn't elevate Internet Explorer or File Explorer windows. So you had to either switch user over, log in as your admin, wait for your profile to load up, and then go do your work, and then switch back to your regular profile. Just way too time consuming. This is really the whole reason that I even started into PowerShell. It could browse UNC paths, and it allowed me to work with file shares in a way that command line wouldn't. If you were using command line, you had to get in there, net use, drive letter, map the drive, and then do whatever work you were going to do. initially I was still using iCackles. I've completely switched over, and I go full, get ACL commandlets, set ACL commandlets now. But it was a good primer. It just got me going. Back when I was doing the Homebrew tools, or my introduction into Homebrew tools, referencing back to Jason, he kind of got the team together, and we were all kind of a geeky bunch, and he says, we need something to get going. We need to be able to log all of our server logins. Like, how do we want to do this? How do we want to be notified of this? Anytime you work with the DoD government networks, and I'm sure this is true in a lot of your networks, you have a top-down approach. And when you're at the bottom level, you're getting fed policy and direction and all the things that you have to comply with in order to do your job. Like, you can't just deviate from this. So we're not allowed to go out and purchase all these third-party tools if they're not evaluated, or if they cost too much, you get denied. So we wrote a VB script, stuck it into GPO on our servers OU, and it was kind of fun to watch the results. Like, every server admin would log in, and then I'd be, oh, hey, did you just log in? And then they would come back and kind of look at me funny, like, why do you care? I'm like, because I'm a geek. It kind of, I don't know, it was a fun script to play with. Eventually it did catch a red team, but we did have one guy, like the lead sysadmin. He would always come in on weekends. So I'd come in Monday morning, and I'd have all these notifications sitting there waiting for me. And I'd be like, hey Gerald, did you log in on Saturday? And he's just like, man, get out of here with this mess. Like, you can't be doing this. And he'd chuckle and walk off. But every weekend he came in, I would get him. So it opened my eyes. Like, we were able to create a tool that otherwise I wouldn't have had any visionary, insight into, to use the data that we already had to catch server logins. Eventually, we'd also catch the guys, when you work in that tear-down approach, you get the guys in the middle with the God mode rights. They'd be logging into our servers too, but we catch them all the time as well. So it was interesting to see that solution work for us, and it really made me think about what else we can do. Like, what kind of data do you have? Baseball fans here? I guess you guys like the Cardinals around this place? Not lately. I'm not too much of a baseball fan myself, but I find myself getting into it more now that I've got a 10-year-old playing Little League. It's kind of fun. When you think about baselines, you've got your normals. Like, you have the way that you do things, the way that you see things that are in your life, the vehicle you drive. If somebody moves the seat in your car forward or backwards, you're going to notice the moment you get in it. If your wife changes the type of milk you drink, you come home and all of a sudden your spouse has replaced your whole milk with 2% milk, you're going to know right away. Anything changes. You see the traffic in your neighborhood, you see the cars driving by. If something looks shady, it kind of sticks out in your head. There's a lot of visual cues you have to go off of. And part of those cues, and it just kind of clicks with you. Change anything, and you notice. The hard part with the computer world is that you have a box sitting in front of you, and it looks the same no matter what. So finding those cues, like what's different, what's changed, what's not right, what's not the way that it's supposed to be, isn't quite as apparent to you. When you look at your IT environment, how many of you know how many users you have? Like, off the top of your head. Who knows? I've got 3,432 computer or users. How many service accounts you have? How many of your users are required to log in during certain hours? How many of your users have specific configurations that are different than all the other users? Same with your computers. Like, how many know how many workstations they have? What type of workstations? The operating system. This is all information that's pretty easily attainable, but kind of a pain in the butt to get if you try to get it manually every day. Groups are a big one. I find that a lot of times when I'm monitoring my groups or I'm baselining my groups, things change. You get some admins that are like, oh, I might need access to this. So they jump in there, add themselves to the groups, and then you'll never notice it because if you're not actively monitoring them, you don't ever see where this change occurs at. Sysadmins. If you have any kind of a large environment, usually your sysadmins are in some sort of tiered format where you have your senior sysadmins or your web admins or your DB admins, and they're separate from your regular workstation admins or your help desk technicians. Do you keep track of those? File system ACLs. Love monitoring ACLs. A lot of times you get guys add themselves into so they can get to some files, and nobody's going to be the wiser. That's one of those items nobody looks at. But should you be baselining that? Absolutely. System events. Last year, I'll get to that later. Software. How many people know what version of Java they're running on every item in their environment? This is, yeah. Or any other piece of software. You get in there, you start looking at the software that's on your systems, and you start to notice some things may not be configured universally across the board. It's nice if you have a third-party tool, but where I work, we don't have that luxury, so I tend to like to baseline my software as well. Services, you know what services are running, their startup, their configuration, what your desired state is. Like, I want everything to look like this. So when you baseline, you want to get or assemble what's normal to you. You can assemble these fairly easily. You save the data as your baseline, and then you use the data and you can track your changes. I've kind of, what used to be a difficult process for me in PowerShell, since the code is advanced more and more, you end up with such smaller code, much easier to work with commandlets. So where do we start with it? PowerShell requires a little bit of syntax knowledge before we can jump in and start baselining everything. All the commandlets in PowerShell are properly named with a verb noun. Now, I tend to like to break away from that if you start looking at your aliases. Script blocks are open with braces. You'll see a lot of them come up. For instance, like a for each. You call your variable name that you're going to use in the for each from your larger or your array here, and then you can do something, but that's got to be within your script block. You can cast anything to a variable in PowerShell. You can cast a commandlet's output to a variable. You can cast an array. You can do just about anything you want with an object in PowerShell to save it or to use it or pipeline it later. Some conditional logic. Excuse me. We have true-false operators that we can use when we're looking for conditions. If you want to find files that are bigger, smaller, if you're looking for anything in that list, greater, less, equals, not equal to, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. Now the difference in PowerShell, and I've even made this mistake a lot, is when I try to set an object, or when I'm trying to use conditional logic, I'll actually use an equal sign, a plus sign, or a minus sign, or a greater than sign. It doesn't always tend to work right. It'll throw you an error, and then you'll go back to the drawing board, review your code. String and wildcard conditions. You can match or use like to search for like star, Windows star. You can search arrays. Sorry, I'm getting a little frazzled here. All right. So anyway, in array searches, you can look for items. So if you have a list of items like software, and you're looking to see if you have the same items in other systems, you can look for. Let me just go here so I can talk to the code. One of the problems I had initially learning PowerShell is that there's 10 different ways to write every command to get the same output. When you start looking at everything, you've got this first example here. You've got a remote host equals my remote PC. Then we're taking that and we're casting a get WMI command over to another variable, WMI comp sys, for a remote system, and then we're getting the username, which is going to show us the currently logged in user. So that's 3 lines that we've typed out to get that information. So the second example, we're doing almost the same thing, except for we're not casting the remote PC name to a variable before we use it. In the third example, we're just running this 1 line in parentheses, and we're using the .username property off of the Win32 computer system and casting it straight to remote user. Then we'd have to call the remote user by just calling that variable name again. In that last example, the only output you're going to get is not going to go to a variable. It's just the username of the currently logged in user on that system. So if you go out and you try searching through anybody's scripts, or you're looking for examples, you might get a little disheveled trying to figure out what somebody's trying to do when you may not know the aliases, or you might not understand where your variables come into play throughout each line of code. Anytime that somebody starts to truncate stuff, and I tend to do this all the time, you can type get alias and then the alias name, and it'll bring it up and show you what the alias is actually doing. Back to the efficiency piece, I tend to use a lot of aliases when I start typing my commandlets because it makes my line really small. A couple of years back, Chris Campbell gave a talk here, and he spoke about playing PowerShell golf. Him and his buddies would get together and geek out on a script to see who could make it the smallest. And you can make things pretty small in PowerShell. So when we look at data sources, like where do you get your data, how you get your data, the first place I start is get commandlets. You can see those by typing get command, get splat, and you get just a couple. There's actually, I want to say I looked it up the other day, like between the functions and the actual commandlets that listed out, there was like 129 of them for PowerShell 5 and Windows 10. And that's without being on a domain system where I've got additional modules loaded in there for Active Directory usages, DHCP, all that fun stuff. The other 2 items I've got here are get help. The get help commandlet, they're like a Unix man page. So if you ever need to know what a command is, like how to run a commandlet, you could use get help and then the commandlet name. At the end of that, if you add full or -examples, what you'll get is actual, like, here's how we run this command. Usually they're going to show you a couple different ways that they're running the command. Excuse me. And a lot of times they're going to show you whether they're casting it a variable or actually using it in a pipe situation. When you start working with your data objects, PowerShell objects are very rich. Unlike your old binaries that you'd have in your command line, when you type the ping, you're going to see your output. It's going to show you, by default, 4 pings, the time to live, and all of that output is going to be just raw text, or strings. You can use those strings if you're good with string manipulation. You can actually cast that to a variable, the output, and then you can work with it. And I've seen that done in some scripts, but I just don't feel like it's as efficient. What we have here is when you type in, get WMI object Win32 computer system, by default you get those 6 lines that are posted there. What you really have is the entire object that includes far more properties. You'll see methods that you can use, properties, script properties. Some of the methods for this, for Win32 computer system, join domain or work group, rename, set power state. The properties, my slide didn't format correctly here. But other properties you can get are like caption, that shows you the operating system caption, the current time zone, install date. I love install date. You can use that one to tell you when somebody's reimaged a box, like if it's new. Boot up state, number of processors. All this information is contained in that object. And you can get any of that data by dotting it out. So if you had, like at the top option there, $var dot number of processors, and it'll output that property. If you wanted to see multiple properties, you could then just send it to select or select object and grab just the fields you want. If you wanted the name, the thermal state, the boot up state, select, name, thermal state, boot up state, with commas in between them, and you're going to get a nice little table. If you have multiple systems in an array, which I'll get to that later, you'll get a nice little formatted table, and you can output that to a couple different formats. WMI in Windows is going to be going away soon. I know Microsoft's been working on getting everything over to SIM, but I still find that WMI is plenty alive and well. And one of the best data sources I've ever used has been WMI Explorer. How many of you are familiar with WMI? So a good number of you. How many of you are familiar with WMI Explorer? So if you want to learn anything about WMI, you can launch WMI Explorer and just browse. Browse through the WMI Explorer. And it's a PowerShell. It's a PowerShell GUI, so it's a script that's provided by Microsoft. You can plug in a computer name. You can then connect to the database locally and just browse through the namespaces. Most of your common ones, like Win32 computer system, Win32 operating system, they're all in here, and then a whole bunch more. This does take a little bit to get this information. But as you start to scroll down through here, they do have the SIM stuff in here. And then as you get down, you get to the Win32 stuff, Win32 CD-ROM. And any one of these you can just click on. It'll bring you up all your properties over on the right-hand side. Any kind of methods you have are things you can change with it, how it operates. And then you have all of your properties. So when you pull in that object, those are the properties that you're going to have available to you. In the WMI Explorer, and again, this is just a really awesome tool to have, you can get your instances, and it'll actually pull in what you would get if you ran git WMI Win32 CD-ROM drive. You also have some methods in here, so this little tool will show you how to work with these methods. It will give you sample code that you can run. Pretty slick. And I find this to be like an invaluable tool. There are differences between the WMI implementations on different operating systems, so we've used this in the past to also highlight where we need to make changes in WMI filters for GPO editing and such. All right. Another one of the data sources I tend to find is I'll go through web searches, look at other people's scripts. Some of the products that are out there, you look at PowerShell. It's a third-party tool that hasn't been evaluated. It's an awesome tool. I really wish I could run this at work, but I can't. So I download it at home, work with PowerShell at home, and I open up all the internal scripts to figure out where they're getting their data. You know, for instance, you can do netstash/nao on your network, and you can see what open ports are on your system and see what open ports you've got running. They're using .NET in PowerShell to do the same thing. So you pull the script apart, find that piece of code, and then I'll start working with it to figure out what all the data is in there. Eventually, you'll be able to pull, or is able to get all the same data in an object that I can work with later and save in baseline. A lot easier than doing string manipulation off of NetStat. Anybody attend Michael's talk last year at ShowMeCon? Yeah. Last talk of the day, and it was a good one. He has, I'm kind of jealous right now. He's also speaking at one of the conference or one of the other rooms right now. He has these cheat sheets for Windows event logging and how to enable, like how to catch hackers and attackers, things that like indicators of compromise through everything that you already have. You already have Windows events. You have event logs. So he's got these cheat sheets out there. And when you go to look at the cheat sheets, he's going to have how to enable them and then the event IDs. If you use PowerShell get win event, you can baseline all of these items and see where things aren't right. You can automate it. It's pretty awesome when you start to see the results in there. Event ID 4624 is a remote connection into your workstation. And that's something that even before Michael's talk that we had an event watcher where we were looking for sneaky sysadmins from those, those mid-level God mode guys. They would come in and they'd connect to our systems, and we were just wanting to keep track of them and see what was going on. So we wrote an event watcher to see who was connecting. And it was kind of interesting at first. You see anybody that connects, to any of your admin shares. You see anybody that pulls any data off your system. Then you start seeing when your SCCM server and your WSUS server start connecting. You'll also see when your ACAS server or your vulnerability scanners start reaching in and connecting. And then you start seeing some crazy stuff every now and again. And this is the things these are the items that shouldn't be talking to you. Like, what if you have a printer making an active connection to a workstation? Things like that. It's really interesting when you go to like the enterprise level guys or those mid-level guys when you start seeing things that shouldn't be connecting. And you're like, hey, why is this connecting to my workstation? Why is it calling to me and not the other way around? A lot of times you get met with like just these blank stares or these funny phone calls where like, I don't know. I always recommend people going out to their favorite web searcher. I tend to like Google. I've been kind of slowly, I don't like to admit this, working my way into Bing. To just search for PowerShell items. Any of my search fields or search criteria, I get in there and I'll work with, usually starting my search with PowerShell and then whatever item I'm trying to work with. If I'm looking for like users or looking for specific configurations, I'll see if somebody else has got something that they're using. I'll pull down some scripts and then I start to explore the objects. Pull the object in, see what it's got, look at its properties. You can teach yourself PowerShell from git member and git help just about. When you do a git member, like if you pipe an object through to git member, it's going to show you all those properties. It's going to show you all the methods that you can do, and then you can just dot your way to bliss. Win32_computersystem.username. And it's all free data at that point. You've got the object. It's not like you're calling back out to get it. If you've got it in the variable, you've got it captured. So saving the baseline. When I start working with an object, and if it's just a simple text list, I'll take that item, I'll send it out to a file, and the text is very easy. You can get content on a text file to bring it back later. XML, I love to export XML. I hate working with raw XML. I don't think there's anybody that likes working with raw XML. So when you do that in PowerShell, you just take your object, export it, you have the entire object saved in your XML. When you pull it back in, you have the entire object back, and you didn't have to mess with any of that ugly XML, like none of it. CSVs, I love to work with CSVs because the boss likes them. They can pull them into Excel, no fuss, no muss. They don't have to deal with the raw data. And then finally, when you have your baseline data and your new data, you can then compare the objects. So very similar to diff, when you compare two objects, you have your input object and your baseline object, and then your reference object in PowerShell, and it's going to tell you what's changed. Now, you can do a simple list. Like if you're working with a simple list, you could just throw them in there, and it's going to return you anything that's different, and it's going to tell you if it's on your input item or if it's on your reference item by giving you a side indicator, and I'll show you that here in a few minutes. Or you can go and use advanced properties. Like for instance, and I'll show you an example here in a few, I've got services. If you just want to see like services, but you want to make sure you're comparing the service name with the startup type and its current status, whether it's running or not, or stopped, you can add the properties that you're looking to compare against. Side indicators are going to tell you what you want. I don't know what happened to my slides here. I'm sorry. I kind of blazed through that kind of quick, 30 minutes. But this is ShowMeCon. This is the last talk of the day, so I've got some examples to show you. And after we get through those examples, if you've got any kind of questions that you have or things that you want to see, either gather around the laptop or we'll do it up. So my first example, I've got some items here. That doesn't show up here? Oh. This is killing me. Come on, man. You know what's sad is I had to turn off my display, so I'll be doing this all like this. So can everybody read that? I had to play with the font settings because a lot of times you see examples and it's really hard to read for the audience. Like, is that visible or do I need to up the size? Okay. So 2 years ago, I got to working on a project for Dave to do a little PowerShell training for some guys. So I actually built out an entire test domain and created a bunch of groups so we could do some of this type work. Man, it's a lot easier when you can see in front of you. So we have an admins group that would be the baseline, people that should be or should have admin access. And then if I want to get new data, I had my admins 2 group or my admins new group. When you go to compare the objects, we have our input object and then our reference object. And that did not work. So I make a liar. Okay, that's why. So this is what an entire object looks like, and I completely forgot that I had the whole object and not just a list of names. A lot of times I'll just dump off the list of names into my XML file instead of the whole group. So when we go back here, if I just do member, when you're doing or working with AD objects, member is not one of the things when you by default that AD pulls in with AD or get AD group. So if we specify that we're looking just at the member list, then it tells me that I've got 2 guys that were added to my second item. If I was to capture this, I now have all of that in a capture. Then it's still an object. So I have 2 fields. I've got the site indicators, which don't tell me anything, but I also have the input objects. In an instant like this, if I just wanted to see what was new, for instance, new additions, capture, pipe it to where, open a script block. Anything you send through a PowerShell pipeline becomes $_. So I've got the whole compare object. $_ is the whole compare object. dot side indicator equals so it gives me just the two that have changed. Inversely, I could then take and do any users who have left the group. There we go. Which there are none. But I could also cast those to variables and use that as an output report. Like new users equals capture where dollar underscore dot side indicator equals from my reference object. So this is a kind of a new laptop for me. I just bought this recently within the last month. When I first got it, I had saved off some the services settings. So I'll have my services baseline. And then I took another one this morning just to see the difference in the services. Thank you. And just like we did the last one, we can compare them. And you'll find that there's nothing different. By default, I didn't specify any field here. Services baseline looks like that. So that it only gives you 3 fields. I'm going to suck this one up here. So you get a status name and display name. But like any PowerShell object, if you pipe it to get member, you'll all of a sudden start to see everything that you have or that you can do or that is contained within this object. Of course, we can't do anything with the services, starting or stopping them at this point, because we're not, this isn't a live object that we've got control here. But we can use any of these properties. So display name, machine name, the container. Container is, I think, where the service, like the executable that the service is running, which I like to keep track of that, because you might have somebody inject a service with a name that looks familiar, but it's all of a sudden running out of like program files, Microsoft, hidden, full of malware. So any one of these things, if we do our compare again, but we specify a couple different properties, name and status. You can see that it shows some differences here that aren't actually like valid here. But if you start to stack all your properties in there that you're looking for, you can start to narrow down your search results. This isn't a domain-connected system or anything that I work on where you're going to have a lot of the same data or similar data, so you can pinpoint those 1 or 2 systems that don't have an item on them. And that's what I have today. Does anybody have anything that they... Man, this is the first time I've ever presented. I got a little frazzled earlier. I know I run early on time, and that's I want to apologize for that. Yeah. So yeah, I guess I didn't explain that super well. But when the side indicator will point to the side of the object that you're working with, so when you have your compare items, so your reference object, like your baseline, and then you have your new input, or your new data that you're comparing against. Whatever order you put those items into your compare, so if your baseline is first, and then your reference object is first, and then your input item is second, the site indicator will show you where it is. So if both things are all equal, you'll get no output.
Okay, so that's why your first example, the site indicator points this way, so those items have it on the view.
Right, exactly. I mean, we can, let me go in here and I'll show you what this all, I'm not a fan of working with the XML, and I can't hardly see this. So our admins group here, let me grab somebody. Where do I have, like, sales? Or I can't even work with that. That's not even right. So we'll add a user. I don't even know who this is, Scott Mosier. When I was building all that presentation stuff, I was grabbing like movie references for my items. So if I go back in here and pull in my baseline, yeah. All right, so if we do the compare format again, compare baseline.member with our new data.member. So you'll see where this guy, Scott Mosier, he was in the baseline, but he's no longer in your input item that you gave. So he would be like if I was running this against against one of my valid groups, that's a guy that left. So this guy just got removed from this group, and then those other two got added to the group. Anytime you see admins, like this is a prime example of something I do all the time. Like I've got a script, and that's all it's doing is just conditionally looking at this data. You know, I have a baseline saved, and when something changes, it shoots me an email. I think I'm running it like 4 times a day, and it says, hey, these guys are new. They're in your admin group, and you're going to see stuff, nothing gets past you at that point. You know, you don't have to like look at it every day and go, were they in there before? Because this is just going to tell you. Yeah, I feel it's a real good way of doing your baseline work. I've got a server object count. I've got my user counts, and it breaks down the users by type. I've got computers count by OS count, OS types, and then I've got group count or a group membership audit that runs, and I've got a whole XML full of group names. So I'll pull in the group names. And then do a for each on them. So I've got a massive XML. So I have an entire, like when I created this deal for the class, I have all the groups in one massive XML that I built with a hash file. And I ran some code last night to export each group object into its own XML so that I could use it for this example. But this is kind of what it looks like. Let's see. So that's all the groups. That's every one of those objects that's an individual XML that's actually stacked in there. I want to say I have. They're all keys. Anytime you're working with XML, like I do this a lot, like I'll forget what I'm doing. If I'm working with a certain type of object, so I'll do a get member on it, and I remember its keys.
So there's all my keys. So like if I had web users, did I miss that one? I think I missed that last character.
So there's like that individual object contained in there. So I would do like a for each item, like a for each entry in $temp.keys, and then it would just, I'd have it iterate through each one of those, pull the group out of Active Directory, read that in, and then do the compare, and then tell me if there's any differences. And it would just stack all my differences in an array and just spit it out in an email, like in an email body, and then send that off. Does that answer your question? Is there anything else?
So would you write scripts and just use the Windows built-in IDE or something better out there?
You know, I want to say we have copies of like Notepad++ rolling around, and I've used that in the past, but like typically they don't really want us using anything but native tools. So I do use ISE on certain occasions, but anytime like ISE support with binaries isn't like greatest. So if I've got to call a binary, I always like to do scripting in like just regular Notepad, and then start from there. You know, I tend to copy lines out of Notepad and just like paste them straight into the blue window. I know when I tend to teach, like if I got like a new coworker in or something and I'm showing them some PowerShell, they'll like instantly go to ISE, and it kind of, you know, it works for them. And I do it sometimes when I've got to step through like a big script, but that's what I use. The other nice thing with ISE, and this is something I think it came around in PowerShell 3 or 4. I know it's also in 5. When you load ISE, you can take any of these commandlets and click on them. And then you can fill everything out here and insert your line. And it'll insert it in a full line. Like there's no alias or anything that it does. And it can get pretty long. Probably a better example. Oh, crap. That's easier for me just to reload that. There we go. So for get WMI object, this thing has all kinds of different parameters, different fields that you can fill out, and you can get some pretty crazy lines with some filters, some WQL. And when you fill all of that out, it'll just insert your line for you. So you don't even need to know like proper formatting. It'll do that all for you. It'll be a very proper line, like get -WMI object -root -class namespace. Like it will go all that way. Anything else? Anything else you want to see outside of this subject? Any other PowerShell questions you have? All right. Thank you for your time.